Hello all, welcome to Narayana IAS Academy. This is Sureka Bhaskar. So this session is little different from the daily live sessions that we actually take for the discussion of the daily news analysis. So this is actually going to be a kind of a quick revision session where we've actually picked up 10 most important topics of the previous week so that you actually stay in touch with the topic and it has not evaporated from your mind. Okay, so let us quickly go through. See, here the detailed discussions of the topic will actually not happen. I will just take you through whatever we have actually discussed. So it's going to be a quick revision or the skimming of the topics that we've already discussed in the previous week. So now let us actually start with the first article, small modular reactors. Okay, so here these small modular reactors are actually gaining a lot of prominence, specifically with the advent of technology and India actually trying to make use of the renewable energy sources. So they want to make use of nuclear energy, which they think that it will actually reduce the amount of carbon emissions into the atmosphere, thereby sticking to their neutral, that is carbon neutral target, and also aligning to the principles of the Paris Agreement. Okay, so here the small modular reactors, and this is actually important for your So this is actually important for both your prelims as well as the mains examination, and specifically for the mains you can map it to your science and technology, developing new technology, and also environment conservation and environmental pollution. Okay, so there has been a previous year question, this would have already been discussed, that is, which of the following countries are the part of non-proliferation of nuclear weapons. So again, these kind of treaties become very important for your examination. So now let us move forward. So here what does this article actually say? The concept of the small modular reactors, that is the SMRs, is actually gaining traction, as you know, in India's energy landscape, particularly after the union budget, where the finance minister highlighted the role of nuclear power in achieving the renewable energy target. So you need to know what is India's renewable energy target, and has there been any kind of SDG committed to the same, and what are India's INDC, that is nationally determined contribution, and what are its climate goals under different conventions is what you need to know. So here, what is nuclear energy? This is very easy to understand, right? It is a form of energy released from the nucleus of the atom through two processes, that is fusion as well as fission. So what do you mean by fission? That is nothing but there is actually an a nucleus, an atomic nuclei. When this disintegrates into a number of atomic nuclei along with neutrons, with the release of a large amount of energy. So this is actually called as nuclear fission reaction. And what do you mean by fusion reaction? When many small atomic nuclei, they join together in order to form a bigger nuclei, that is called as a fusion reaction. The fusion reaction is what we see in the sun, etc. Okay, so now so this is what nuclear energy is, the energy released from the nucleus of the atoms through the process such as nuclear fission as well as fusion. And here, what are nuclear reactors? The reactors, or the instruments, or you can say the machines that actually use this nuclear energy, where it can actually control the nuclear chain reaction. Okay, so a place where the nuclear chain reaction takes place in a controlled manner are the nuclear reactors. So they actually operate on the principle of nuclear fission, very important, where the nucleus of an atom, usually the atoms are uranium-235 as well as plutonium-239, they split into smaller nuclei along with few other neutrons and large amount of energy. So here this particular energy is used to heat the water, producing steam, and that actually drives the turbine that is connected to a generator. So this is what is actually a nuclear reactor, that is where the nuclear fission reaction takes place, or nuclear chain reaction takes place in a very controlled manner, and alongside there is disintegration of what? The atoms with large amount of energy that is actually released, and that energy is actually used to heat the water that runs the turbine. Therefore, there is actually, this is connected to the electricity generator. Now, moving to the important point, what are the small modular reactors is what is important for our discussion. So there are traditional nuclear reactors versus the small nuclear reactors. If you see small, these are nothing but they are much more advanced, but they are smaller in size. Okay, so this is what you need to know. So the small nuclear reactors, they are advanced nuclear reactors with a capacity of less than around 300 megawatt, and also they are designed to be very compact, okay, to be very factory friendly as well as scalable, and also they can be transported from different place to another place, okay, when the factory is actually is going to get relocated or it actually moves its location, this will be easier. Now what is the difference between both the traditional as well as the small nuclear reactors is over here. So if you see, these are the major differences, okay. So what is the first difference? The capacity of a traditional reactor will be big. So it is 1000 plus megawatt, whereas this is less than 300. If you see the other parameters, the construction time, of course it takes years, that is 10 to 15, and this is only 2 to 5 years. The deployment, this actually has a fixed location and a large infrastructure, whereas this can be transported and installed anywhere. And if you see the safety, it has active cooling system and higher risk, okay, but it's associated with higher risk, whereas this has passive cooling and there is lower risk of accidents that can actually take place. And scalability is, it is fixed capacity and this can be scaled up by adding more units to it as well. And then initial cost, it's very high, billions of dollars, whereas this is comparatively low and it is more affordable. And now refueling, this actually, since because of its large size, this needs less frequent refueling, whereas this is actually required, that is, it requires more frequent refueling. And also waste management, there is high quantity or there's high amount of radioactive waste that is actually generated. Here also the waste is more but comparatively less, okay, but still it actually requires management is what this article actually says. Now moving forward, what are the challenges and considerations? So what are the challenges is that there is still they have not proved whether they are commercially viable or not, because these are still in the experimental phase. Now moving forward, there is higher demand fuel, okay. So it requires frequent refueling due to smaller fuel cores. There are very small compartments, that's why they actually require more frequent refueling. Next one, nuclear waste management, it is lesser, that is the waste generation is lesser when compared to that of traditional, but still they actually generate radioactive waste which requires stringent waste management regulation. And finally, there are a lot of regulatory hurdles, that is many countries including that of India need to develop new nuclear regulators. So this is what it is. Yeah. So the next one is the next article that we'll be dealing with is subsidies of fossil fuel. So this topic is very important because we had already a question asked in the 2022 mains examination, okay. So why do we have to shift from subsidies that is actually being given to the fossil fuels and focus on the renewable energy was what the question is all about. So here you need to know what do you mean by renewable energy. And followed by that, there are also other concepts like you need to know what do you mean by the fossil fuels and what are the regulations with respect to fossil fuel, usage of fossil fuels that India has actually come up, and what are the impact of fossil fuels on the climate change, and what is the amount of subsidies that the government actually give to these fossil fuels, okay. So on one side we actually try to curb the menace of climate change, but on the other side what happens, the government is actually still giving subsidies. What do you mean by subsidies? It's the amount of money that the government is actually giving either to the producer in order to reduce their cost of drilling, etc., and it also gives to the consumers like us, okay. Subsidies is given so that the fuel that is consumption of fuel actually becomes very affordable for us. So why this is actually done, and globally what is the quantity of or the amount of subsidies that is given by the other governments apart from India, what is the per capita contribution, all this we will actually see in this article. So quickly taking you through, what are fossil fuels? These are the sources of energy that is formed from the remains of ancient plants and animals that include coal, oil as well as natural gas. They are used for what purposes? One is electricity generation, next is transportation, industrial activities, but they are a major source of carbon emissions on one side is what we need to know. Now, understanding what are the different kinds of fossil fuels and what do you mean by fossil fuel subsidy is very, very important. So first one, what are fossil fuel subsidies? These I already told you, right? What do you mean by fossil fuel subsidies? This is nothing but just note only the lines that I'm just marking, okay? These are financial support provided by the government to the fossil fuels like coal, oil as well as natural gas in order to make them cheaper for both the producers and the consumers. So they can actually reduce the production cost for the companies, okay, in extraction, refining as well as distribution, or it can reduce the prices that the consumer bears while consuming all these products, okay. Next one, let's see what are the type of fossil fuel subsidies. Actually, if you see, this fossil fuel subsidies that are given by the government, it actually amounts to around 7 trillion US dollars. This is the entire amount that is actually given by the governments across the globe. So now if you see what are the types of the fossil fuel subsidies, the first one is production subsidies. Now let us see what are the types of fossil fuel subsidies that the government actually gives. The first one is the production subsidies, that is, it is 4%. This actually means that 4% of the total of $7 trillion is actually been given by the government to the producers of fossil fuel. Similarly, consumption subsidies. Consumption is what? For the consumers like us, okay, where the government actually bears the majority of the price and they give the fuel for consumption for the consumers like us at a subsidized rate, at a lesser rate, that is around 14%. Next one, there are implicit subsidies, that is, the hidden costs are actually there. Hidden costs means what happens if there is any kind of damage that is actually caused to the environment. There are a lot of environmental pollution, health concerns, etc., right? So the government spends on that. So that is also included as a subsidy over here, as a hidden cost. Do you understand? That is the environmental damage and the health impact from the fossil fuels. Also, the value added tax which are foregone, that is when the producers are actually not charged any kind of VAT, then that also comes, or it is included as the subsidy. So that is actually 5%, air pollution cost is 30%, climate change cost is 30%, and finally the road use cost is 17%. So these percentages are not important, but you need to know what are the different types, because we know that the government can give the money only to the producers or they can actually give to the consumers, right? But other than that, there are so many other types of subsidies that the government gives it in an implicit way that we need to understand. Now, let's move forward. What are the global fossil fuel subsidies? Let us actually see. So, if you see, around $1.2 trillion are the explicit subsidies, that is either it actually gives to the producer or to the consumer explicitly. But if you include the implicit ones also, it accounts to implicit ones like environmental damage, etc., it accounts to 7 trillion. And however, there has been recent spike in the year 2021-22, mainly due to the volatility or the energy crisis that has actually been followed by the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And let's see what are the countries with the largest fossil fuel subsidies. That is, we have Saudi, Turkmenistan, Libya, Algeria, Iran, and over here that is $1,000 per person annually is spent on fossil fuel subsidies. Very, very important. If you actually see this map over here, it is the fossil fuel subsidies per capita as of 2020. one. Okay, so which are the highest over here? See, around $1,000 if you see these countries. Okay, so Libya, Algeria, Iran, so these countries are the higher ones. Next one, in India, if you see, it is $53 per person. Still it is actually, you know, higher side for us, because we actually aim to combat climate change in many ways, right? So at the same time, if we actually give subsidies also, so what is the point in that? Okay, one way it is like we are promoting the consumption of fossil fuels. On the other side, we are trying to combat the climate change that is actually created or caused by the fossil fuel. So this is what it is. Next one, these subsidies actually represent more than 10% of the GDP in some countries, which is huge. Now, moving forward, what will be the implications of fossil fuel subsidies in an economy? Of course, these are very, very general factors, isn't it? So, first implication will be environmental impact, because you know it causes air pollution, climate change, etc. Next one, there's going to be a lot of economic burden, okay, because they are actually, what to say, rather than focusing on very, very important or vulnerable sectors like healthcare, education, etc. What if the money is diverted towards subsidies for fossil fuels? It's further going to aggravate the problem in India, right? So that is what. So economic burden it's going to cause, then market distortion it's actually going to cause, because when the subsidy is actually given by the government, then the total, you know, the price of the fossil fuel actually falls, so the market actually distorts or crashes, and we also won't move towards clean energy. Next one, there is social inequity, okay. So this kind of subsidies often benefit only the wealthier households rather than all the common public, is what the article says. Now, what are few of the approaches that actually have to be followed in the fossil fuel subsidies in giving it is that, first, you need to cut your support for the producers. Next, you need to cut your support for the consumers. Next is you need to impose pollution taxes. Very, very important. These are some of the words that you need to know, okay. So you need to levy the carbon taxes. So you know, right, this CBAM, carbon border, CBAM by EU. So all these you need to know. Do you understand? Yeah, we were talking about CBAM, right? So this stands for carbon border adjustment mechanism, okay, of the European Union. And also you need to reform the tax policies, and rather than giving them exemption, you need to impose them, is what they are saying. And also you need to apply road taxes and also the congestion charges in order to offset the fuel related externalities, and finally promote the clean energy. So these are all the things that you need to follow. Now let's quickly move on to the third article for the day, that is ethanol blending. So here the Union Minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, had actually said that India is going to achieve a target of ethanol blending of up to 20% in the next 2 months. For that, first you need to know, what do you mean by ethanol? Ethanol is nothing but it is actually a type of alcohol, and it is also known as ethyl alcohol with the formula C2H5OH. Okay. It is commonly referred to as the grain alcohol, or it is called as the drinking alcohol. It is volatile, of course. See, these kind of physical as well as chemical characteristics are very important for you to understand, okay. So they are volatile, they are flammable, that is catches fire, and colorless liquid. Now, how the ethanol is actually produced? Either it is by natural method or it is by synthetic or chemical method. What is the natural method? Here what happens, the raw materials like sugarcane, rice, wheat, molasses, all these are actually taken, and yeast is actually made to react on it. So here the yeast actually breaks down this sugar into ethanol plus carbon dioxide, that is C2H5OH plus CO2. This is actually released, okay. And here the uses are in alcoholic beverages, in sanitizers, in biofuels, etc. Next, if you see the synthetic method, that is the chemical method, here there are petroleum based raw materials which are actually used, such as ethylene. Okay, so let's see, ethylene and water. So these are the raw materials, and ethene is actually made to react with it. So if you see here, petroleum based ethylene and water, here ethene reacts with water in the presence of a catalyst, and that catalyst is phosphoric acid, and here finally it forms ethanol, and industrial ethanol is actually used for chemicals, solvents and fuels. Okay, now moving forward, let's see what are the uses of ethanol. I told you it is already used as a fuel, that is why it is called as a bioethanol. It can be either used in blending, okay, so that is to 1 quantity of petrol, 10% of ethanol is done, that means E10, that is the blending of ethanol is up to 10%. Now India is actually aiming to achieve E20 very soon. This is what it is. So this will actually help in the reduction of the carbon dioxide emission and other greenhouse gases. Okay, so this is what it is. The first one, it is used as a bioethanol. Next one, used as, you know, the alcoholic beverages we already saw in beer, wine, whiskey, etc. Next one, as industrial, in industrial solvent, it is actually used in pharmaceuticals, then cosmetics, paints, perfumes, etc. And then in also medicine as well as pharmaceuticals, again here disinfectants, antiseptics and medicinal drugs. Finally in the chemical industry as well, and then as an antifreeze agent. Okay, so it is actually used in coolants as well as de-icing fluids for vehicles as well as aircraft. Now moving forward, let's see what do you mean by blending of ethanol. So yeah, so what do you mean by ethanol blending? So it is used primarily as a biofuel, and when blended with petrol, it acts as an oxygenate. What do you mean by that? A substance that actually reduces the harmful emissions from the vehicles. And ethanol blending is nothing but process of mixing ethanol with petrol to create the fuel blend. It can either be 10%, in which case it's called as E10, or 20%, in which case it's called as E20. And the target blend is often denoted as E10, E20, where the number represents how much percentage of ethanol has been blended. Next one, what is the government target? It has actually set a target of achieving 20% of ethanol blending by 2025-2026. And this target actually aligns with broader objectives that India has actually taken in order. There are certain objectives are there, that is India wants to reduce its dependence on the fossil fuels, and also they want to mitigate the environmental pollution. They want to promote the use of renewable energy, and in order to achieve all this, we need to produce approximately 1000 crore liters of ethanol annually. Okay, so this is what it is. And also as of 2024, we have actually reached a percentage of blending to around 13 to 15%, which was only 8% in 2021. And also the government's roadmap was actually prepared by India's think tank, that is Niti Aayog. This actually outlines the expansion of how to actually further increase the production capacity of ethanol with the focus on sugarcane based and grain based distilleries. Okay, so here we've actually finished the concept of ethanol blending as well. Now let's move to the fourth topic. Okay, so this is actually cess and surcharge. So here very important topics. Okay, so these kind of concepts like capital expenditure, revenue expenditure, cess, surcharge. What do you mean by revenue, and what are the elements of capital expenditure? What do you mean by fixed capital? So what do you mean by fiscal deficit? All these things, okay, and BOP, balance of payment, then trade deficit. What are the basic meanings of this, or the definition is what you need to understand, especially when you solve your papers. You will know that economy based questions, that is specifically concept based questions, are always asked. So in that light, you need to know what do you mean by cess as well as surcharge. Why this was in the news? Because there was a very large opinion that the union government has been largely inclined towards, or it has been depending more on these two concepts of cess and surcharge, okay, of tax revenue. Usually what happens, whatever tax that the central government actually imposes, be it the income tax or be it the corporate tax, what happens, the tax revenue that actually comes, okay, that total income is actually shared, certain percentage like 41%, 42%, that is actually shared with the states based on the recommendation of the Finance Commission. However, the constitution itself actually gives exception to these two concepts of cess and surcharge. That is, when the union government actually levies the cess and surcharge for a particular purpose, then what happens? It's kept in a separate reserve and it is not shared with the states. Now states are actually saying, when you don't share the cess and surcharge, then my revenue is actually being depleted. It is getting reduced, is what the state governments are actually saying. Now, let's quickly go through what these concepts are, okay? So, what do you mean by cess? It is a tax which is imposed on another tax, a tax on tax for a specific purpose. So, this must actually be for one designated purpose only. For example, I can actually levy a cess saying that I am using only for the education purposes, or only for health, or only for sanitation. So, I can actually levy what? The Swachh Bharat cess. Do you understand? I can use that only for this particular purpose, okay? And it is actually excluded from the divisible pool. What do you mean by divisible pool? It is nothing but it is the amount of money that is actually shared between the center and the state based on the recommendations of the Finance Commission. That is, whatever tax they get, they actually have to share with it, but cess does not fall under that divisible pool. Example is education cess, that is funding primary education, Swachh Bharat cess, maintaining sanitation, as well as crude oil cess. This is funding oil industry development. Now, and this, what happens is that it is actually levied only for a particular period of time. So, the period up to which you will actually levy this particular cess has to be mentioned. That is, I am going to levy this for the next 6 years, for the next 12 months, sorry, 6 months, next 12 months, next 3 months you need to say. Whereas surcharge, it is nothing but it is a tax on an already existing tax, okay. So, this actually applies to individuals who actually earn beyond a certain income bracket, as well as the corporate, that is the companies that actually produce humongous profit. So, that is called as surcharge, and it can be used for different purposes and not only for one dedicated purpose, is what the concept says. So, this is a surcharge. So, it is an additional tax levied on an existing tax, mainly to fund the government expenditure, and it can be used for general purposes and it is excluded from the divisible pool. This is also entirely managed by the central government. So, here cess on income tax, that is high income individuals, and additional levy on the company profits, that is surcharge on corporate tax. So, surcharge on income tax and surcharge on corporate tax. So, these are the differences. So, this cess must be collected for a specific purpose and the amount is kept in the reserve fund and must have a proper sunset clause. That's what I told you, right? The period actually has to be mentioned and cannot be continued over indefinite period. Whereas over here, it can be imposed by the union government only, applied to the higher income groups or corporate tax, and it can be used for any government expenditure unlike the cess. So, this is what it is. Next one is legal and constitutional basis. So, any topic that you see, what is the legal basis? If you see Article 270 of the Indian Constitution, so this specifies that taxes that are levied and collected by the union are distributed between the center and the states, but cess is excluded from the divisible pool. Whereas 271 actually gives the authority or allows the parliament to levy a surcharge on any tax in the union list, and this is also exclusively retained by the center, and thereby it is actually excluded from the divisible pool. And now, if you see the recent budget estimates, the share of cess and surcharges is 10.97 per 100 rupees. That is, if the total tax that the government has actually collected from all of us, be it the corporate tax, okay, be it the income tax, all that sums up to be 100. Of this, what happens is that 10.97 is actually the cess and surcharge. So, if around 10% is subtracted from this, what happens? There's only 90, right? So this 90 rupees only has actually been eligible to be shared between both the center and the state. So that's what they are saying. So divisible pool share always remains below 90% per 100 rupees collected by the center. Next, there has been a rise in the cess, that is, it ranged between 5 to 7 rupees per 100 pre-2020. After that, increased to 13.5. Now it has decreased to 10.97. This is very, very important because these trends are actually, very, very common in the UPSC examination. Now, let's move forward and see state's share in the divisible pool. Okay, so state's share from the divisible pool has actually been reduced to 41% from the earlier 42% by the recommendations of Finance Commission. And if you see who gets the maximum share, it is the states of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. Okay, so here you can see. Next one. What have been the observation of the Controller and Auditor General report? They actually noticed that 2.19 lakh crore of cesses were not transferred. See, cesses are actually dedicated for specific purposes like education, health and everything, right? But they have not been transferred. And also, funds meant for the development of the oil industry had also not been utilized for that particular purpose. So, what are the concerns and challenges? The states actually feel that our revenues are shrinking because it is not shared with us. Next one, there is lack of transparency because we saw in this report itself they are not transferred to a specific purpose. Next one is fiscal federalism is in the question. Okay, that is what fiscal federalism is. What it is? Equitable share between all the states. That is, center should actually not incline or should not be partial towards one particular state, right? But here what happens, they are saying that the center is actually using or overusing the power of such cess as well as surcharge in order to undermine the basic tenet of the fiscal federalism over here. So this is what is very, very important, where the southern and the eastern states actually feel very, very anguished because the northern states of UP and Bihar, which are actually backward in terms of development, they receive the larger share. That is why the southern states actually question, for our own efforts which has resulted in our development, we are not being paid. Okay, but for the states who actually have taken no measure for their development, they are receiving a major share of your tax devolution. This is what they have told. Okay, now quickly moving forward, next article is WHO funding. Okay, so why this is in news? So recently we know when Trump actually assumed the presidentship of the United States on Jan 20, 2025, they actually issued the executive order of moving away from the WHO, that is the World Health Organization, which is a UN specialized agency which aims at controlling the diseases, that actually promotes universal health care, etc. And also they actually decided to, that is the United States, they decided to move off the Paris Climate Deal also. Okay, so first we will see, because of that, how there is a funding as well as a functionality contingency in the WHO. So for that we need to know what is WHO. It is a specialized agency of the United Nations and established in the year 1948 and headquartered in Switzerland. And here the mission is to promote the universal health, control the diseases as well as coordinate the health responses. So here it actually takes care of this universal health, and also it is responsible for controlling diseases as well as bringing up programs. So here I will actually tell you a very, very easy story. So WHO is a 3-tier system. That is, it actually has a structure of 3 tiers, where the first one, which is the higher or the biggest decision making body consisting of 194 members, is the World Health Assembly. Okay, so this actually has 194 member states, and then you have the executive board which implements the decisions that have been taken, and here there are only 34 members. Next one, you have a secretariat that is actually led by the Director General, and that is currently Dr. Tedros. Okay, so he is from Ethiopia. The period is from 2022 to 2027, and this particular Director General is also elected by the highest decision making body, that is the World Health Assembly. Okay, got it? Now what are the key functions? First one, control the disease as well as eradicate it. Then involve yourself in health emergency response, such as, for example, if there is COVID sudden or outbreak of COVID-19 or a pandemic like that, you need to immediately respond. Next one is actually research as well as development, and finally vaccination and health program. If you see India with respect to WHO, here India has been a founding member of WHO, okay, and this also has an office in New Delhi. And if you see, WHO supports various of India's health programs like the Ayushman Bharat, then National TB Elimination Program, polio eradication, etc. Now, moving forward, let's see WHO's funding structure. So, this is where I told you, I'll actually tell you like a story, okay. So, WHO, for any organization to function, what happens? There has to be funding that has to come, right? So, people have to give it money. So, similarly, for WHO to function also, there are two kinds of funds. First one is assessed contribution. What do you mean by the assessed contribution is, it is like the membership fee that every member is supposed to pay. This is called as the assessed contribution. It is not a voluntary basis. People have to give, and in this case, US being one of the developed nations has been the largest contributor as a member, and that is why this particular assessed contribution is actually going to miss the major funds. Next one is the voluntary contribution. Voluntary contribution is if, for example, WHO has taken up any kind of eradication plan, for example, the polio eradication plan. For that, there can be a voluntary amount that the members can or need not contribute, okay. So, this is what it is. So, assessed contribution as well as voluntary contribution. Now, when the US withdraws from there, what happens? There is actually going to be a financial strain. If there is a financial strain, the kind of impact if it's going to have on the global health programs and schemes are going to be affected. And also there's going to be institutional weakness, because recently you saw after the withdrawal of the United States, Argentina became the next country to walk out of the WHO. So there's going to be institutional weakness as well. Now, what happens is reduction in global health inequities. So, what do you mean by this is, it's actually a wrong thing, because what happens, just because for the membership US actually gives in more amount of money, what happens? The WHO has been focusing more on the diseases that that will actually happen or that will actually recur in the United States. In that pursuit, they have actually forgone the vulnerable situations of other countries, specifically the Democratic Republic of Congo, especially other countries in Africa, South Africa, etc. Okay, so this you can actually see during the Mpox outbreak, okay, because vaccines were already ready in the US during the outbreak, whereas Democratic Republic of Congo, the availability was very, very scarce. So this is what. So Mpox outbreak, prioritization of the diseases affecting the high income countries, and also this walking out of the US from here, it's also seen as one of the good opportunities in order to bridge the gap and to treat all the members equally. So this is where there is actually importance of emergence of global south. All the other countries, the regional groupings must actually come together and have to assume leadership in order to bridge this particular gap. So a call for a global south leadership, where countries like Asia, Africa, Latin America should all come in order to see or to fill up the funding gap, which specifically BRICS is actually seen, that is Brazil, Russia, then India, China and South Africa. Also you need to know who are the members who lately joined the BRICS, and the final one as of 2025, it is Indonesia. These are important prelims pointers, okay. So here this is what is the problem with the WHO. So hereby WHO reforms actually have to be there, because it is situated in Switzerland, okay, that is also one of the most developed nations. So now we need to decentralize it and we need to move them towards the countries which majorly need their presence, such as Democratic Republic of Congo or somewhere in some other place in Asia, etc. And also there has to be structural efficiency, where you need to streamline its bureaucracy. reduce the administrative overhead and reallocate the resources rationally, and there has to be greater representation also. Next article, we have 4 more articles, that is Atmanirbhar in pulses. So what here is that the budget 2025 recently came out with a mission, that is mission for Atmanirbhar, that means self-reliance of pulse production in India. So I will again tell you a story like thing. So if you know, there are something called cereals, right? So the cereals are the bigger group. Under this, millets are there. These cereals are nothing but it is your rice, wheat, etc. And these millets are actually your ragi, jowar, bajra, etc. Okay, so these are mainly grassy plants and they are rich in carbohydrates. Now you have another group that are called as the pulses. So these actually include your tur dal or arhar dal. Then you have your urad dal, you have your chana dal. All these are your pulses which are very rich in proteins. So if you see, with respect to pulses, India is actually the largest producer, the largest consumer, as well as the largest importer. Look at the irony. So this is what it is, okay. So that is why it is actually in trade deficit most of the time, because most of our production is not even sufficient for us to consume. Okay, it is actually very less for us to consume. So on top of that, what happens? We actually import also. So this is what we are going to see. So first, let us actually see what about this particular mission. The mission is actually focusing on 3 different things, okay. First one, MSP based procurement, that is to the particular farmer. The government is actually going to give the MSP or the subsidy and get these pulses from them. Okay, what are the agencies which are responsible for that? One is NAFED, that is the National Agriculture Cooperative Marketing Federation, as well as the National Cooperative Consumers Federation of India, that is NCCF. So this will purchase the pulses from the farmers. Next one, this is to maintain a fair pricing. So this is the first one, MSP based procurement. Second one, after the harvest there has to be enhanced storage infrastructure in India. So post harvest storage must be focused on. Next is what are the crops that are focused here? Very, very important. Tur or arhar, that is called as PGNP. Next one is urad dal, which is urad is called as the black gram. And finally masoor, that is called as red lentil. So I'm just taking you through what is the focus of this scheme. Now moving on, we will actually see what are pulses. I told you, right, these are leguminous crops. What do you mean by leguminous? That is, plants cannot directly absorb raw, you can say, the available nitrogen from the atmosphere. So they actually, with the help of bacteria like Nitrobacter aceti or different kinds of bacteria, what happens is that they absorb and they fix the nitrogen that they require for their growth in the soil. So they are called as leguminous crops, and these are pulses, okay. So they are leguminous crops which are grown for their dry grains or seeds. This is actually a key source of protein, okay. And then they exclude the green vegetables. You know what are the major pulses like Bengal gram, pigeon pea, then arhar dal, and then you have the lobia, kabuli chana, etc. What are the growing conditions? It actually requires dry condition, temperature between 20 to 27 degree, rainfall between 25 to 60 centimeters, and finally sandy loamy soil. The seasons is pulses. There are different kinds of pulses grow across 3 different cropping period, that is the Kharif, the Rabi, as well as the Zaid, okay. So the Kharif period, that actually starts in the month of June and it actually goes on, okay. June, July, August, September till October also. So here moong, urad, tur are actually grown. Then the Rabi, which actually starts from November and goes on to March. that is November to March. This is the period where maximum, that is 60% of the production in pulses is actually being done, like gram, channa, all these require mild cold also, okay, during their growth, and specifically they need warm situations during the harvest. So during sowing they need the colder situation. Next one, Zaid pulses are also there, which actually continues thereof from the month of March. Now, what has been the status of imports that India actually has with respect to the pulses? If we see from 2017, in 2017 actually the amount of pulses that we imported declined. So it actually became a new low. Okay, so there was actually a path towards self-sustenance. Okay, but if you see in 2023-2024 again imports surged, and then in 2024 itself what happens is that in April and November months imports again increased to 3.28. okay, so this actually was a 56.6% increase from the previous 2.9 billion, and currently if you actually see imports have already crossed 40 lakh tons. So what happens, only once there was a dip and then the range actually has increased. This is what we are saying. What are the reasons for imports? One is that our consumption is actually more. Next one, the domestic production actually has a lot of shortfall, and the MSP farmers are not satisfied because the actual production of the crop that is similar to that of, or it is almost equal to that of the MSP, so they don't find profit, and also farmers actually move towards other commercial crops as well as water intensive crops. The climatic factors are also one of the reasons for that. So first one, domestic production shortfall. Okay, so there was a lot of drought, so that caused the production to fall, and here it actually increased the import dependency. Next one, there are duty free imports, that is if you're going to import pulses, you're not going to be levied any amount of charge by the government. That is what it is, actually duty free. So it motivates them to import, because what is the use of me having subsidy without earning any kind of profit? For that I will actually import duty free, right? So that is what it is. Next one, there is price disparity between the MSP as well as the domestic pulse prices, and also we actually rely more on the foreign markets, like we rely on the Tur and Arhar from Mozambique, Tanzania, Myanmar, and then also for Masoor dal and Matar from Canada, Russia and Turkey. So what is the impact? The impact of importing a more amount of pulses or any kind of crop, it's going to have economic pressure because we are going to be at a very high trade deficit. Next one, disincentive to the farmers. It's not going to motivate them at all. Next one is, because when we are importing, the domestic prices what they actually produce, now that is going to fall. Next one, food security risks. Okay, so there's going to be heavy reliance on the imports, and this exposes India to the volatility of the global prices. So this is what it is. So for all these reasons only, India introduced the National Food Security Mission of 2007 and 8, which actually said grow, cultivate and promote, okay, what do you say, promote rice, wheat as well as pulses through the expansion of cultivated areas is what it said. However, whatever we talk, there are going to be certain hurdles always. First is agricultural constraints, we saw, right? Because this is actually a, it has a long, if you see Tur and Arhar, these pulses actually have a long crop cycle. They are trying to reduce the crop cycle to 150 days. What is the crop cycle? From the period of sowing till the time of harvesting. It usually had to take more than half a year, around 260 days. However, they have actually reduced it to 150 days. But however, the productivity or the outcome has again hit. Okay. Next one, Tur and Arhar, it's mainly restricted to the Marathwada as well as the Vidarbha regions of Maharashtra, and also certain parts of northern Karnataka. Okay, so there the farmers also do not have enough of alternatives for growing other kind of crops. Next, there are policy changes like duty free imports, I told you, then unattractive price margins also I told you, because the MSP was 7550 and the market prices was around 7000 through 300, so 200 rupees of MSP. So it did not matter to them. Next one, unattractive, this one, and also vulnerability to weather extremes. And finally, there are shift towards profitable crops. That is, they move towards, the commercial crops and then other water intensive crops, all those things. Now, moving to the next article, that is INDC. This actually stands for nationally, India's intended nationally determined contributions. Already you have a PYQ. So here, usually what happens is that under the 2015 Paris climate change, don't look at the board, just focus on what I'm saying. So usually under the 2015 Paris climate change, all the countries that are parties to it have to submit two types of climate action plan. One is of short-term climate action plan, that only is called as this intended nationally determined contributions. Next one, beyond that, what is going to be your long-term action. So it has to happen once in every 5 years. So India has actually previously submitted in 2030 and now it has to give it by 2035. But now we are actually going to slightly delay it because we were not very happy with the outcomes of the COP29, that is in Baku. Recently there was this climate change conference, right? So we were not happy with the outcomes because for the climate financing, the developed nations actually had to contribute $1 trillion. But it was decided at the end of the meeting that they are going to give only $300 billion. So India is going to delay that. That is why this particular article is in the news. Now, let's get started in understanding what is this nationally determined contributions, okay? So, NDCs, according to the Paris Agreement, the countries actually have to develop two types of climate action. One is short-term climate action, that is the NDCs. Here, the countries are actually required to submit it every 5 years and they have to detail the specifics of the climate actions they are going to take for 5 or 10 years period. Next, beyond that, there is long-term climate action, that is countries must also submit this in order to achieve what they are going to significantly achieve in their emission targets and other things, okay? So, here it was actually 5 years once, right? So, here there is no fixed time frame. Do you understand? Now moving forward, let us see what was the previous NDC that India had actually submitted in 2030. This focused on reducing the emission intensity of GDP by 45% from the 2005 levels, and also it ensured 50% of installed electricity generation capacity that will come from non-fossil fuel sources. Very, very important. And also increase the amount of trees, that is afforestation, or you can say increase the amount of carbon sinks, that is increase the tree cover to absorb around 2.5 to 3 billion tons of carbon dioxide annually. Now, why is there going to be a delay? I already told you, right? Why is there a delay? Because there is a delay due to dissatisfaction with the developed nations' failure, because they actually promised 1 trillion per year, but then it was concluded that they will give only 300 billion per year annually. That too, it will start from 2035. So India and the other countries have actually said that this is very, very poor as well as paltry. And it argues that this is not enough for us. Now, what do you mean by climate finance? That is more important. So, climate finance is nothing but it is the financing that is actually drawn from the public, okay? So, here it is the local, national or the transnational financing that is drawn from the public, private as well as alternative sources of financing. This seeks to support mitigation and adaptation of climate change. Next one, what are the existing pledges, okay? So, initial commitment to this particular climate finance actually happened in the 1992 UNFCCC, that is United Nations Convention or Conference on Climate Change, being that developed countries should provide financial sources to the developing countries, okay? This was accepted. And in Copenhagen Conference, that is COP15, various countries agreed to mobilize 100 billion a year, okay, by 2020 to address the needs of the developing countries. Next, what happened at COP21 in Paris, parties extended to give this through 2025, okay. And here, what are the different financing mechanisms? It can either be in the form of Global Environment Facility, it can be in the form of Green Climate Fund, it can be a special climate change fund, and then least developed countries fund, adaptation fund, etc. So this is what it actually says. Now coming over here, the climate finance architecture. So where India actually receives all the fund, it is from the budget, the state budget, as well as the budgetary support of national missions. And then you have the private climate finance, that is CDM, then international climate finance, the multilateral funds, the bilateral funds, all these are the sources for the climate finances in India. Now we have done with this, let's actually move to our next article, that is IMEC. What do you mean by IMEC? This is India, Middle East, Europe Economic Corridor. Easy, right? It's going to connect India, the Middle East, as well as the Europe. It's going to be an economic corridor. That is, it's going to be having ship lines, that is waterways, as well as railways also. That is going to connect India up to the Middle East as well as Europe, okay. So this is what it is, very, very simple. So this is actually considered as a project for peace. However, implementing and going forward with its implementation has actually been disrupted by so much of volatility in the Middle East, specifically the Israel-Gaza war. So this is why this particular article is in the news, okay. So there is actually Israel-Gaza war and it has delayed the IMEC's planning. Now, let's move forward. So it is a multimodal. What is IMEC? It is a multimodal transportation corridor. So this consists of rail as well as ship-to-ship networks. It is made up of two corridors, Eastern Corridor as well as Northern Corridor. So if this is India, this is Middle East, this is Europe. So here it connects, so Eastern Corridor connects India to UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan and Israel. So India to the Middle East, okay. And Northern Corridor connects the Middle East countries to Europe till Greece. So this is what it actually says. So how do we say that this particular project is actually efficient cost-wise? Is that it reduces the time of transport by 40% and the cost by 30%, okay. So this is going to reduce the overall logistical expenses of trade, and it's also going to improve the supply chain efficiency. What are the elements? There are going to be electricity cable, there are hydrogen pipelines and high speed data cable also. Now let's see what are the key ports that are associated, okay. So key ports actually include the Mundra port in Gujarat, and followed by that you have the Kandla port. So we have the Jawaharlal Nehru port, and then also followed by that in the Middle East, what are the different ports that are associated is, we have the Fujairah, then the Jebel Ali, and then you have the Abu Dhabi in UAE, as well as the Daman and Ras Al Khair ports, and these are located in Saudi Arabia, okay. So here moving forward, let's see the railway lines. So see, don't think too much, I will just show you on the map. Don't see the rail link, ship links and all. If you see this one, you can understand. India, Middle East, it's going to connect Mumbai, it's connecting to Jebel Ali in UAE, then it is actually connecting again to Al Guwaifat in UAE, see this one again, and then the Harad in Saudi Arabia, then Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, Al Haditha in Saudi Arabia, then moves to Haifa in Israel, and finally to Greece, okay. So this is the IMEC corridor. Because of this, what is going to be the economic integration is that it is going to streamline, okay, the energy, that is the trade in energy, infrastructure, industrial goods, all these are going to increase. So this is actually going to further result in economic integration. And then the strategic positioning is that it is set to be in parallel with that of the Belt and Road Initiative of the Chinese, and also gives an opportunity for India to have a good influence in the emerging global south. Okay, and also it supports the regional resilience by providing an alternative to Suez Canal also. Okay, so thereby we actually reduce our dependence on the traditional sea routes or the trade routes. Okay, so this is one of it. Next one, ninth article, and then after that we have one more. Okay, next article, marine heat waves. Why this particular article was in news? Because there have been recent studies that actually suggest there have been increasing instances of marine heat waves, specifically in Western Australia. So that this is actually affecting the coral reefs. It's causing the death in the fish ecosystem. There's causing a lot of ruckus to the balance of biodiversity or ecosystem. So what do you mean by marine heat waves? That is very, very important. So here, when the temperature of the surface of the sea actually increases to around 3 to 4 degrees, and that actually maintains for at least 5 days, then that situation is actually notified as marine heat wave condition. Okay, very, very simple. So let's see, this actually happens when the sea surface temperature is 3 to 4 degrees above the average for at least 5 days, above the average. For example, if it's 20 and it rises to around 24 and it continues for 5 days, then the situation is actually declared. Okay, and now it can last for weeks, it can last for months also, or even years, and it affects both the coastal as well as the deep waters. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, what happens? These events have actually been doubled since 1982 due to global warming. And also there has been an IUCN report of 2021. This actually says that these marine heat wave incidences have actually doubled by 50% over the past, and now it lasts longer and they will be actually more severe. Now, what are or why are marine heat waves increasing? That is actually because of global warming. Okay, because there is lot of global warming, and the sea surface is actually, or the ocean is absorbing a lot of global heat. Okay, so here if you see, since 1890 the temperature of the sea surface itself has increased to around 1 degree, which is a huge thing. Okay, so global sea temperatures have risen by 0.9 degrees Celsius since 1850, with 0.6 degrees increase in the last 4 decades. Okay, so here reports predict that if the global warming is going to reach around 1.5, that is if it is going to reach a temperature of around 1.5 degrees, then marine heat waves will become 16 times more frequent, and if it increases to around 2.0, then it is going to be 23 times more frequent. So this is what it is said. Other things, impacts and all are very, very easy, right? So impacts of marine heat waves, first one, obviously it actually affects the marine ecosystem. For example, in 2011 there was a heat wave condition on the western coast of Australia. This caused a loss of kelp forest. Okay, that actually resulted in the decline of further fish population and ecosystem structure. Then if you see, shifting habitat ranges. Here, rising ocean temperatures, that actually is favorable for some kind of organisms, and it is actually unfavorable for few. So this actually enable, or it pushes or forces the marine species to migrate. So this will actually affect the food web as well as the food chains. For example, the spiny sea urchin of the southeastern Australia has expanded into Tasmania also, overgrazing the kelp forest and destroyed the vital marine habitats. Next one, it causes a lot of economic consequences. How? Of course, the fishing and aquaculture industry will be disrupted. Okay, so this actually happened in the USA in 2012, and now there is obviously biodiversity loss, because there have been lot of coral losses in the year 2020 in the Indian Ocean region, as well as the coral bleaching incidences in Gulf of Mannar near Tamil Nadu, India. Now, next one is aggravating the ocean stressors. So they actually intensify the environmental issues. Okay, what are the stressors? Not only affecting these species, it further aggravates the processes like ocean acidification, deoxygenation, as well as overfishing. Okay, so this actually happened in the North Pacific blob heat waves that resulted in the reduced oxygen levels, resulting in die-offs of marine species. Next one is large or mass fish extinction or mortality and habitat destruction. Okay, so one interesting thing is that apart from affecting the ecosystem, it also affects the climate, that is the monsoon and the rainfall patterns, and this is actually seen in the Indian Ocean region as well as the impact on the monsoon. So there has been an increasing trend because this has been a study that has been conducted in India, that is one of the Pune institutes, and then they have found out that these marine heat wave situations have increased by 4-fold in the tropical Indian Ocean, and this has been aided by rapid warming of the Indian Ocean as well as El Ninos. And these marine heat waves impact the monsoon. How? Because they actually reduce the amount of rainfall over the central Indian subcontinent and enhancing over the southern peninsula. So next one we will actually see here, marine heat wave conditions. So this actually happens in the western Indian Ocean, where these are the weak monsoon winds and these are strong monsoon winds. There is a marine heat wave, so it becomes weak. So here the Indian subcontinent becomes dry. And here also, when there is strong monsoon winds, here this part of southern India is wet. By the time it actually goes there, there is marine heat wave, and then this portion is dry. The final article that we'll be discussing will be sacred groves. What do you mean by sacred groves? So recently, Supreme Court had actually come up with a ruling. Usually sacred groves are those that actually don't come under the, forest department. These are regulated and maintained by the local communities, by the people, okay. But then Supreme Court has actually ruled that, it said that, it transferred the management of sacred groves from local communities to the forest department, creating a conflict with the Forest Rights Act and potentially undermining the community-based conservation. So what are sacred groves? These are patches of forest that the local communities protect due to their religious or cultural significance. They are associated with deities, spirits and ancestors, and also activities like hunting, logging are typically prohibited, whereas depending on them for livelihood like honey collection, all that is allowed. Now India actually has around 14,000 to 1 lakh sacred groves. Now diversity and distribution, they are actually distributed from north to the south across India. You can see here in Karnataka it's called as the Devara Kadu, and then there is Devban in Himachal Pradesh, in Kerala, and then Odisha, Chhattisgarh it's called as Devbani, and then Devgudi in Muria, and then the Gond Adivasis of Maharashtra and Chhattisgarh, as well as the Sabarkanta in Gujarat. What is the ecological significance? What is the ecological significance? Because some of the sacred groves actually act as a biodiversity hotspots, okay, because they house most of the rare as well as endangered species, so that the genetic diversity is maintained. And the next one, apart from that, they provide the ecosystem services like soil conservation, then the retention of water, climate regulation, all that is actually being done over here, okay. So this is one. Next is, it also actually indicates and symbolizes the rich cultural heritage, okay. These are repositories of traditional knowledge and cultural practices, okay. So this actually gives a deep connection between the communities and the environment. Now, any topic, what are the legal framework? First is the WPA, that is Wildlife Protection Act. So this initially introduced the concept of community reserves, okay, and this was added to the Wildlife Protection Act through the Wildlife Protection Amendment Act of 2002. Very, very important. It was already not there. It just was included or inserted. That is, the term community reserve was added in 2002. And these areas can be owned by individual or communities, but managed with the support of the Forest Department. And here, Community Reserve Department community reserve management committees are formed in order to oversee the management. So here these committees actually have 5 members nominated by the Gram Panchayat or the Gram Sabha, and then a representative from the Forest or Wildlife Department, and in private land cases the landowner is part of the committee. And these activities like hunting, cutting or damaging the vegetation, and any kind of activities that disrupt the natural habitat and biodiversity, such as using chemical substances harmful to the wildlife, all this is not allowed. So this is WPA. Now let's move forward. Next is Forest Rights Act. This recognizes the rights of the forest dwelling communities over, that is, how much of rights that these forest dwellers have on these resources is what this Forest Rights Act 2006 actually says. That came a long time after the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. That got amended, where community reserves were actually included in the amendment of 2002. So here Forest Rights Act, community forest rights allow the local community to claim rights over the forest and the forest resources. This also includes their claiming of rights of the sacred groves. If sacred groves are located within the areas that meet the criteria of CFR. Next one, this means there is a legal right that is actually given to these people, local community, to conserve and manage these areas, okay, in order to preserve their traditional practices. Next one, the Gram Sabha, it plays a role in this Forest Rights Act as the body which is responsible for identifying, for claiming and managing these forest resources, including the sacred groves. Next one, Forest Conservation Act of 1980. This regulates the diversion of forest land for when there is diversion of forest land for non-forest purposes, it actually aims to regulate that in order to prevent the deforestation, okay. So this was initially, it came into existence with the objection to prevent the diversion of any such land such as agriculture, etc. So now, as the Supreme Court says, if these kind of the reserve for, the sacred groves actually comes under the Forest Rights Act, then what happens is what the question is. So if sacred groves fall under the forest land categories, their management will be overseen by the Forest Department. This could actually conflict with the community-based observation practices that actually the groves are governed by, okay. So with this, we are actually done with the analysis of the weekly current affairs. I think it would have actually helped you in a quick brushing of the topics that we've actually dealt so far. So we are actually coming up with these courses on every weekend, so that this actually helps you to stay tuned and recollect as to what you learnt in the previous week. So with this, I'm actually signing off. So let's actually meet in one of the next DNA sessions as well as your revision classes. Thank you.